everyone. I'm Alessandra from Planet in Focus, and we are back with another segment of the 2023 Eco Film Lab program. Today, we are speaking with Kat Mills, who's an established filmmaker. Many of her short films have screened at Planet in Focus, including Fixed, The Billboard Squad, and Me, Mahmood, and the Mint Plant. So today, we are going to reference some of those films. You'll see clips of them in this program, but I'm also going to go ahead and ask Kat some of the questions that you submitted, some of the questions that I have for her. So let's just dive right into it. Hi, Kat. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
I want to start off with the kind of stories that you tell. I find that there's always a special subject. For us, we call them subjects in documentary film. Some of the students might know them as lead characters. So they're often personal stories and very community based. How do you translate your own stories into a documentary film, or how do you find your subjects? That might be a two-parter, actually.
Yeah, so I tend to read a lot. I also like community events. I like going out and meeting people. And I find that usually like I'll hear about a lot of things, I'll meet a lot of people, um, but I look for novelty, right? So I look for something that I've never heard of before, like somebody who's doing something kind of strange and unusual that I'm just like, oh, I don't know about anything about that. Let me learn more. And for people that are really bright, kind of colorful, I like funny people. It's really easy to make a funny documentary if you have funny characters or funny subjects.
Mhm.
Does half the work for you. Um, and just people that are not too self-conscious, I guess. Like they're willing to tell you how they actually feel about things. They're willing to be, vulnerable, maybe cry or get angry or, have a really good laugh on camera. So I look for very genuine people who are doing something maybe a little unusual that I've never heard of before. Those are my two keys to success, I think, in film.
I love that. I think it's so important to find a true, well-rounded character. You don't want someone that's doing something exciting, but then they won't talk about it either.
Yeah, absolutely. They need to be open book about stuff.
An open book. Your films also sometimes can take a journalistic or more of an investigative style. I feel like with the Billboard Squad, we kind of followed that journey a little bit more. So, can you tell us a little bit about researching the topic? So, once you've found the subject or found this exciting story, how do you go about researching it to know how to dive a little deeper into the subject matter? Where should a new filmmaker start?
Yeah, research is always tricky. And I think one of the trickiest things about it, and it's the same kind of with a character as it is with a topic, is you dive into a topic and your topic is this big, but you only have this much time to tell it. Right. So you have to, you're I mean, I'll start with the internet. Usually, like if I'm following a person who's trying to accomplish something, they tend to be experts in that particular field. But you have to talk to them about everything that they know, as well as independently go online, talk to other people because your character might be wrong about something. So you need to know that. Um, but yeah, I will do a deep dive. I'll usually interview a lot of different people who are also kind of experts in that field. So
Mhm.
I can have an understanding because you really, if you're telling a story about a subject and there's a journalistic approach, you really have to understand that story and understand what's going on in order to communicate it because you're going to have to pick certain things to communicate because you don't, unless you're making a 2-hour film where you really have time to go into all the deep research and tell everything like it is, you're going to have to choose like a certain elements to focus on. So that could be really hard in a short amount of time. Um,
Absolutely. That segues right into my next question about creating the story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. So, referencing back to the Billboard Squad, we saw it started out with this incredible character, and then the story eventually branches out to visual pollution of billboards, the conversation, deeper conversation about the environment and the overall cityscape, how that's affected. So, can you talk about the specific choice when it comes to telling or writing a story? Because I think a lot of students don't understand that even in documentary film, you do have to write a script and have a story plan. So how does that work when you're researching and as you're developing your characters and all of that? How do you then come up with a beginning, a middle, and an end?
Yeah, it's really hard. And
I imagine there's a lot that's out of your control that kind of you might have to change and pivot too.
oh my God, almost all of it's out of your control. In reality, right? Like you have a story about somebody who's trying to run for mayor and then they get hit by a car and like your whole thing changes, right? So you
Right.
don't you can't predict what's going to happen in
Mhm.
life. What's funny about the Billboard Squad was that I came across that story through a friend that had recommended a group called the Toronto Public Space Committee. So they're people, volunteers, everyday citizens that care about how Toronto is. And like when you go and walk around in the streets, like what are you seeing? How are you feeling? Are
Right.
there parks that you can sit in? All of these things. Um, and Dave, who's the character in the film, he had a blog post of this running saga of him trying to get these two illegal billboards torn down and like the ridiculous back and forth with the city and everything. And it was funny. He was a funny writer. The situation just seemed kind of ridiculous. Um, and so we actually pitched that film at Hot Docs in the short pitch competition. And it was right at COVID. COVID started. So we had submitted the pitch, like we'd submitted this idea. We want to do this film about this guy trying to get these billboards torn down. But like he's got all these other people helping him, and they're like a lot of older folks, and like, there was an older lady who needed like a wheelchair to get around. And we thought, oh, what a great team, these two, and like all these different characters. And so we had sort of pitched this idea of like this quirky ensemble of all these different, gumshoe citizens trying to get these billboards torn down, right? And it would be like investigative, but really funny and like kind of guerrilla-ish. And then COVID happened, and we're like, well, we can't make films anymore because we all have to stay inside. And how is that going to go? So when that happened, talking about predictability, like how do you know what's going to go on? Um, Most of those people weren't gonna get involved anymore because they were worried about their health. They were worried about meeting other people and getting sick. So it ended up being kind of like young people trying to take on these billboards. Um, and our original idea was still to get these two billboards taken down. That's how we wanted to have the film, was with the billboards torn down. But when you're fighting City Hall, that takes a long time and you can't guarantee your ending unless you want to be filming it for the next 15 years, right? So um, we had to, you will always pitch something that is kind of different from what you end up with. I
Right.
think it's what everybody should know is like, we want to make a film about this guy and all these quirky friends, and they're gonna tear down these billboards, and it's gonna be a fun party and everything. We still have a film about a guy taking down billboards and fighting billboards, but we had to look at like a bigger picture and then a smaller picture. So the bigger picture is, how do these billboards make us feel living in a city when we're constantly getting hit with advertisements, 24/7, you can't escape it. Um, but also, what is it like for this guy and what's his personal journey? And a lot of the films, it really comes down to the person that you're following. How do they change by the end of the film?
Hmm.
And that's very hard because you can't force anybody to change in real life. But hopefully, you're going to go on an adventure with them. And by the end of it, they come out with a bit of a different perspective. And
Hmm.
a lot of the times, you don't know that deeper story until you actually start filming and you get to know somebody a little bit better.
Hmm. And that's a really great note, I think, for the students watching is don't be afraid to go with the flow. As long
Yes.
as you keep your overall message, maybe you write a log line or kind of a short idea of what your film is going to be about. Stick to that overall message, but it's okay to kind of weave and flow in and out of that. And if your subjects change, if your story changes slightly, that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you could have a story like I don't know why I always reference somebody running for mayor. Jim is trying to run for mayor. Here's the action that we're going to follow. Jim is running for mayor. He's going to succeed or he's failing or he's going to fail.
Mhm.
Right. But also, Jim doesn't have a great relationship with his dad. And he really wants his dad to support him, or he really wants to connect with his dad. So you're filming Jim as he tries to become mayor, but you're also filming Jim as he's trying to become closer to his dad and like fix his bad son father relationship.
You might
So
also want to interview his dad. You might
exactly.
decide to include his dad. And
Yes.
that reminds me too of not that anyone was running for mayor, but in Fixed, you had a
Mm.
lot of really great characters and subject matters. And that followed the Repair Cafe. For those of you who don't know, the Repair Cafe, it's still running, isn't it? In some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it is still going. Yeah.
It's such a fantastic program where you could bring, gosh, I've seen anything from bikes to blenders, and there is an expert in different kind of tech and mechanics, and they'll help you fix it instead of throwing it away. So Fixed was a fantastic short film that we screened at Planet and Focus. How did you pick the characters to interview? How did you know when to stop? How did you know that you needed more? Yeah, how does that work when you have a lot of people that you're thinking of including in your film?
Yeah, that's really tough. And that's kind of a different beast of a film because the Repair Cafe would only be running for like 4 hours once a month
Right.
or something,
Yeah.
right? So, um, we had 2 teams of camera people. Sometimes it was just me and another camera person. Was it always just me and another camera person? This was like 7 years ago, I'm trying to remember. But it was we were keeping an eye out basically,
Hmm.
on the people that were coming through the door. And so you would, kind of be waiting there with your camera and like, the other camera person would be getting shots of people arriving and pouring their coffees and chatting. And that's what we call B-roll. So it's sort of anything that's not really your story. Um, sets the scene. And and I would kind of be like looking around and talking to people and I told the organizers that we're looking for like interesting people and we're looking for interesting objects, right? So sometimes somebody has a story behind their object, or sometimes it's like whatever, a really boring lamp, but that person's really funny and like quirky, and you just kind of want to see what they do.
Hmm.
And we had a couple of fixers that we liked as well. But it really we were just keeping an eye on who came through the door and who was the most interesting. And then we'd film them and it'd just be like one person, the 2 cameras filming over the shoulders and like getting the object in the faces and just seeing what happens. And so we filmed a whole bunch of different pairings. And there were some good ones, and then there were some ones that just like didn't really pan out to anything interesting or whatnot. And we just chose the ones who we thought were the best. It was really sad though because one of our fixers was a guy named Louis. He was paired with an older lady named Shirley Ann who had like a vibrating hairbrush she wanted fixed. And he also got paired with this like other woman named Gloria who was just like fixing her blender and was fantastic and really funny and like flirting with him. And it was just so much fun to watch these two, but we couldn't have Louis in there twice.
Oh,
So
I
we
see.
had to we had to choose we chose the vibrating hairbrush over the blender, but
Yeah,
it's too bad
I can
because
imagine that would
otherwise,
have been funny. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so I mean, even though you don't know who you're going in to interview, how does interview prep work? Do you have some questions ready to go, or do you just kind of make them up as you see your subjects walking around and hear their conversations, and then you kind of create your questions then, or is that part of preparation?
So for that film, because that film is very much what we'd like to call it kind of a fly on the wall. Like the camera's there, but you are as the filmmaker aren't interacting too much.
Mhm.
Like you might shoot off a little question every now and then as it pops up, but really you kind of want to see what they do, without twisting it too much on a certain
Pulling
way.
and manipulating the story, absolutely.
Yeah,
See,
without doing so. Yeah, so that one we were kind of just like watching to see what happens, and then throw the occasional question like, "Where'd you get this thing from? Why do you like it?" The core questions with any interview that you're doing
mhm,
is, I mean, it's who are you is one of them. Like, who are you? Why are we, kind of why are you interesting?
right.
Um, but also, why are you doing what you're doing, and why is it important, and why do you care about it?
Mm,
Asking people why they care about something gives you the most interesting questions because that's when people usually let down their guard and they go, "Well, I'll tell you why I care about gardening, or
ex-
I'll tell you why I care about this or this." And sometimes these really wonderful personal stories come out, and it's so nice to hear people share their personal stories and you get to dive into that. But, what are you doing? Why is it important? And why do you think it's important? And you'll get cool answers.
That's a great start. I think it's a great start, and you really get at the heart of it too. Um, you mentioned a really interesting point that for fixed, it was you and one other person shooting. Now, these are likely student groups that are going to be making the films involved in Eco Film Lab. So, what, in your opinion, is a great start in terms of a team? What roles are crucial, and how many kids should get together, or students should get together
Mm.
and divide up the work? Keep in mind that these are short films about 4 minutes long.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
So you would generally have a director, a camera person, a sound person, and an editor.
right.
These are usually your four kind of core roles. That's not to say that one person can't play multiple roles.
Exactly.
So a lot of the times I will go out with my camera, with the microphone, and I will film people and direct it, and then I will go home and edit it myself. So you can you can have one person that does all of it.
Yeah.
It's pretty tiring. Um, and it's good to work with other people because often you'll get better ideas. The
Mhm.
good thing about doing it with just one person is that if I'm interviewing you, Alessandra, there's nobody else around. It's like a quiet conversation. You might feel a little less nervous just talking to me versus if you're talking to me and there's another person here with a camera and there's somebody above you with a microphone and like all these things. Suddenly you're talking to like three people and you become a little bit more nervous. Um, but generally, yeah, you would want director, camera person, sound person, and editor.
Excellent. I think that's a great start as well. I totally agree. You touched on this a little bit, but what advice do you have to give for the students who are starting small and creating no budget films?
Mhm.
Now, especially given that your expertise is in these community driven, um, more journalistic films, what advice do you have on students working in their own communities?
Okay, so we're talking about teams, right? They're working in teams?
Yeah, likely small.
Okay. So choose your director, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe what you do is you first choose your story.
Aha.
And so I would suggest in your teams have a little discussion. And I think for your first film, I would say go as easy as possible, go as simple as possible, and talk about interesting people in your family or interesting people in your community. Maybe you have a neighbor that's done something really neat, or maybe your mom had this time in her life where she did this really cool thing and she learned a lot from it or whatever, right? You talk about it, talk to your families, talk to your neighbors, talk to like cool uncles and aunts and everything, and find a story that exists within one of your families, right?
Right.
Because if you have what we call access, like if you can get to that person really easily
Mhm.
and film with them a bunch, and they know you, so they're happy to talk to you. You're not a stranger, and they'll share with you their stories. That's a really because filmmaking is very, very hard. So if you can choose somebody that you have great access to, that's easy to get a hold of, and will give you their time and be really honest with you, that will make everything else easier. And also, if it's somebody within your family or community, they probably have maybe old photos. They probably have old videos that you can include in your film. We call that archive,
Exactly.
um, which is great. They'll probably let you film them, I don't know, drinking coffee in the morning or tending to their garden, sort of getting shots of them in their world, in their home, that you also use as B-roll
Mhm.
in the story. It's not just like a little interview with somebody and they're spending the whole time talking to the camera or talking to you. You need other shots. You need shots of their home. You need shots of them working around their home or maybe at their work in their office. You need to see them kind of doing stuff as they're telling you their story.
And you can pull the audio from those interviews to carry on top of all of that b-roll and archival, just a little bit more dynamic visuals than a talking
Yep.
for such a long time. That's a really great note for an emerging filmmaker, student filmmaker. Absolutely. Now, on the subject of subject matters and themes, in Mahmood, Me Mahmood and the Mint Plant, you cover deep and difficult subject matters of displaced peoples, the refugee crisis, and yet it struck me that the film was so lighthearted and even geared toward a younger audience, or exploring this subject matter for younger audiences. So for the students and teachers that take part in the Eco Film Lab, how do you suggest that they find that balance when writing the story of the film, or covering maybe some difficult subjects that are happening in their communities, or that they do, the stories that they do want to share of an environmental crises that they're dealing with? How do you cover a deep and difficult subject matter and keep it, it might not have to be light, but kind of explore that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, it's interesting because I sort of decided to go the route of making lighter type films after I worked on a very heavy project.
Mm,
I used to live in Malta and I worked during the refugee, I mean, there's still a refugee crisis, but a lot of people would travel through the Mediterranean Sea from North Africa on their way to Europe in these boats. And a lot of those boats were bad boats and they would sink, and it was people would die, and it was this terrible, it's still happening. It's a terrible, terrible situation. And I was out on a boat from Malta, and we were intercepting these boats coming from North Africa and taking people on board and bringing them to Europe so they could apply for asylum, so they could claim refugee status. And I would be filming this, and you were seeing people go through, oh, some of the worst moments of their lives, for sure. Um, and we put it out sort of as news bursts. Um, and the feedback was just like really awful and racist and terrible. And I was surprised because I thought, I thought sharing moments of hardship might bring out more empathy with people, that they might, want to open their doors and their hearts to other people who are going through a hard time. And I think that that does happen, but that wasn't really what I was seeing. I was seeing this weird, unexpected negativity, nastiness.
right.
And so I decided when I came back to Canada, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to make films about people being kind to one another and showing kindness. And let's see if by showing kindness, we inspire kindness and understanding and acceptance, was kind of my idea. So Fixed was the first film I made when I came back to Canada, which is all about kindness. It is strangers helping strangers. That's what it is at its total core. And I tried to keep that up. So with Me, Mahmoud, and the Mint Plant, it follows the story of a woman from the Yukon who's a nurse who goes and works over in Iraq in a war zone. And she meets a man who carries with him everywhere, a local man, carries a mint plant everywhere. And it's bizarre, it's strange, but he's very likable. And she eventually asks him, why are you carrying this mint plant? And he tells her that he had made a promise to his youngest daughter. It was her plant, and she had to go away to a displacement camp, and she wanted her father to take care of her plant. And so he promised he would take it with him everywhere that he went, and he kept his promise. And so it's like the environment of the film is a war zone.
Hmm.
It's a hard place. But here was this like really beautiful story about a man that was just keeping his promise to his youngest daughter. And that promise like grounded everybody around them and made them realize what was important. And you realize that like we can't control the world around us. Like there can be chaos around us, but we can control our promises and the way that we treat other people. And keep our word. And so that was really the story there. So I think if you're making a film that has too much heartache, not a lot of people will want to watch it, because we already experience so much heartache in the world and heaviness and bad news, and those are important films because there's something that we need to see so that we can fight to make things better. If you can find something that is a harder topic, an important topic that we do need to see, and you can find a way to make it a little sweeter, a little, I don't know, kinder. It's hard to describe it, but if you can find a certain lightness to bring into it, people are going to
Find,
watch it.
exactly, find the light in the darkness. Find either a hopeful message or a meaningful moral kind of
Yes.
value to bring through. I think
Yeah.
that's a really, really important piece of advice. And I know that it's something that we deal with at Planet of Focus all the time when we're curating the films to screen at the festival is, does this have a message of hope? Um, is the audience going to come out of it feeling like they can take action and be part of the change? Sometimes it's not always possible. Sometimes you just have to tell a story for what it is, and not every story has a happy ending. But I think it's great for the students involved in the Eco Film Lab program who are going to be working in their communities to find the light in the darkness, as you say, and kind of bring that hopeful message through. Because especially for a short film, I think it's so important to kind of have that lightheartedness. Um, and that's something that you're such an expert in with short films. Is it a choice for you? I mean, of course it's a choice for you, but why do you make the choice to always create short films, or mostly create short films? Is there a reason why you like them more than features?
Uh, well, I do like short films. Um, to be honest, this is like a business side of things.
Oh,
With a
okay.
short with a short film, you can go to a broadcaster and they'll give you all of your money up front to make it. With
Oh,
a longer film, you know, one broadcaster might give you a small chunk and then another one will give you another chunk. And then you're sort of like chasing the money for a really long time
right, right.
before you can, you know, and then you're making a film about the turtles migrating and the turtles are migrating, but you don't have all the money yet. So you're trying to live off credit cards. So there was like so there's not a romantic answer to that. It's a very pragmatic answer to that one. But I do like shorts. I also think shorts are really hard because you have to tell a story in a very, very short amount of time. And
Absolutely.
with a feature film, if you have an hour and a half to get there, you can have moments where, you know, the character is just quietly contemplating or thinking about things, or you have more breathing space in a longer film. With a short film, you have to kind of keep it punchy and keep it moving.
Yes, absolutely.
So it is a challenge. They both have their pros and cons, but
Sure. I think it also has to do with a lot of the attention spans today. I personally love short films. I love getting to, I feel like an expert at the end of a film. And it only took up 10 minutes of my life. But I can imagine it being difficult when you're editing and all of the hours that you shoot to pare that down to, let's say in this case for the Eco Film Lab, 4 minutes. What advice do you have for young filmmakers who are starting out in terms of editing, let's say, you know, 30 hours that they've shot, who knows how many, down to 4 minutes. So,
yeah, it's really hard. It's going to be a lot of trial and error, which is you try something and you realize it sucks, and then you try something else and you realize
right,
that also kind of sucks, and then the third time, it gets a little bit better. You have to think about scenes. So when you're making a film, you have your film is made up of scenes. So in our opening scene, we meet Joe and we learn he wants to run for mayor. And, you know, we like Joe and he's kind of interesting. In the next scene, he's talking to his friend and he tells his friend he's nervous about running for mayor because he doesn't think he's good enough. And, you know, he has a bad relationship with his dad or something like that.
mm,
In our third scene, something else happens. So you need each scene, something needs to happen that takes us a little closer to the end, right? It takes us
right,
gives us a bit of a better understanding of our person, our character that we're following, as well as gets us on the trajectory to the end. So it might be a scene where we learn something about them. We realize they're scared or nervous about this, or we realize they have a bad relationship with their dad, or you know, oh my God, I've just gone to City Hall and I put my name down for mayor. Oh, you know, like that scene also has us moving forward.
right,
So the stuff that ends up on what we call the cutting room floor is stuff that doesn't bring us forward.
right. Keep the story moving.
Keep the story moving, keep the story moving. And there's gonna be a lot of stuff that you film that you love that just doesn't make the cut and it sucks and it still kind of hurts afterwards because, you know, what a great moment that just got lost.
Yeah,
And I think also what I would let you guys know is that you film all this stuff, then what you make is an assembly. So an assembly, and if let's say you shot 30 hours, let's just say that, your final film is going to be 4 minutes, your assembly might be an hour long. It could be very, very long, right? And what it is you've gone through that 30 hours and you look and you go, okay, these are the scenes or the moments that we think are going to make the film, and you're going to put it in a big long row, and then you're going to watch that all, and you're going to go, okay, this sucks, this sucks, and I say sucks, it's like we can't keep that, we can't
Compared to the other scene that
cut,
I
cut,
shot,
cut,
it
cut, cut.
sucks. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Right.
then you get a rough cut, and your rough cut will maybe be 20 minutes long for your
Mhm.
4 minute film, right? And then you watch that again and you go, okay, we're going to cut this, cut this, cut this. And then your fine cut. And during the course of this process, and this is the hardest part, is you have to show your film to other people
Right.
and ask them for their honest opinion about how the film is going, right?
Even if it hurts.
And it will hurt because a lot of the times, your assembly will not be very good, your rough cut will not be very good. And it was really hard to get it to that point and so much work to get it to that point. But you have to remember, you are not your film.
Right.
This film is separate. Whether it's good or bad is not really a reflection of you.
Mhm.
You want to make this separate thing, this separate film, as good as you possibly can. And so you need to show it to people, and they'll be like, well, it was boring here, or it was confusing here, or I didn't really like that person, or like I didn't understand that scene. And then you go, "Oh, okay." And then you go back and you look at what they told you, and you rewatch your film and you try to make adjustments. Sometimes people give you notes that you don't agree with. Maybe they're not great notes. You don't have to take them, but you should always listen to them, right? And
Absolutely.
then feel if you go, yeah, that makes sense. Let me fix this scene. Okay,
Mhm.
that makes sense. Let me fix this scene. And then you show it again and you show it again. And by the time you're finished your film, you've probably seen it 400 times and you don't like it
And
anymore.
that's normal, and you should
Yes.
feel. Oh,
Yes, that's what I mean.
that's such a great roadmap of
Mhm.
where to start, how to cut it down, when to ask for help, and when to go with your gut and just go for it. I love that. Um, let's touch on audio a little bit because it's often overlooked, but it's so, so crucial. Of course, they say, 50% of your film is visual, 50% is audio. What is your advice on how and when to use music, sound effects, silence? So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so it really depends on what your film is.
Mhm.
Right? Like if you have a really short, like I made a film, it was called Big Men, Small Dogs, and it was about large men that had tiny dogs, right? And it was like a 7 or 8 minute film. It was short. Um, and there's a lot of music in that, and it was like kind of funky electro swing music. So it like gave it good energy. But
Right.
you can't have music the whole time. And so normally when you're hitting like a deeper emotional sort of thing, somebody reveals something about themselves or whatever. At one point, there was a guy who was talking about, he really liked his dog because his dog like had asthma and he had asthma, and then his dog also like he had a neurological condition that would make him kind of shake a little bit, and his dog also would shake, like had a bit of a shake to him. So he felt like this connection with his dog, right? um,
That's
and so it was really sweet. It's like this really sweet, genuine moment where like he didn't even remember telling me this. And when I showed him the film, he's like, I told you that? I don't remember. Um, but that's where you take out the music and just let somebody honestly talk. Or
right.
if you have music, make the music more subtle so that it contributes to what they're saying. You're not going to bring in like heavy violins or rock music when somebody's like revealing something really sweet. So you don't really want music the whole way through. It's going to get distracting.
Hmm.
You have to choose when to like bring it in, bring it out, bring it in, bring it out.
Make it
Um,
intentional.
make it intentional and make sure, and you have to listen to it. Like, is this music distracting me from what I'm watching? If it's
Right.
distracting you, you change music or you try something else. Yeah.
Hmm.
Change music or take it out. Yeah.
That's great. That's really great. Um, I feel like you've touched on it a little bit, but has there ever been a time when something didn't go to plan? And I'm assuming it has. And how did you readjust your plan to finish the project? Because life happens, school happens. How do we kind of regroup and get it done?
So I will say that um, That's not the exception, it's basically the rule that it will not go according to what how you think it's gonna go, because life doesn't go the way that we think it's gonna go.
Right.
I mean, with the Billboard squad, we wanted the billboards torn down. For the billboard, and that would have been a great ending, the cranes, like, knocking them down and
Very
Dave's happy.
happily ever after. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be great. We'd be like, "Yay, we succeeded. What a great ending." Um, but in reality, we didn't have enough time to film that. Like, we shot that film over 2 years, and those billboards did not come down. They are
Mm,
still up,
yeah.
right? It's probably gonna take another 20 years before it works through City Hall to eventually get them torn down or whatever, or, it could be 2 days, who knows? You can't predict when it's gonna happen.
Mhm.
So, you have your ideal ending, and then you also keep in mind that we're probably not gonna get that ending. What's our backup? And so for that film, we needed something dramatic to happen to the billboards, right? And we also needed some sort of, I will say, nod or like a little, wink to Dave's mentor, Tucker. We needed some sort of ending to the Tucker story, who was,
Right.
you know, as Dave outlive Tucker and these things. So we had both. Dave came up with the idea because you also want to be careful. You don't want to you are there to sort of follow somebody else's story. And you
Mhm.
might talk to them about like, we need this to have a bigger ending, but you don't really want to make the ending up yourself because then it stops being a documentary. It starts being like you making a fictional film,
Right.
right? So Dave came up with the idea of, and he had said that from the beginning of like, let's paint over them or like, let's do something really cool to them. And so he decided to cover them with a sign that said notice of violation, which is like a legal term, which is which is kind of fun. And he put Tucker's face on there in one of the like he had bubbles up there and he put his face there. So we had like this moment, and then we had some quotes about like it takes, a village to change something kind of idea, right? It's not just one person, it's everybody that comes before them and after them. Um, so yeah, so the ending wasn't we knew it wasn't going to be what we wanted it to be, so we had to accommodate to it. And there was another film that like I produced, but it was about a gal who was learning stand-up comedy, like she was learning to be a stand-up comedian,
Mm.
and she wore a hijab. And so she was like using sort of her identity to like she was making jokes about being a Muslim as a way to like kind of build bridges and like create understanding and things like that. And one of the challenges we found was like if she was a basketball player and she's like trying to shoot hoops and missing and missing and missing, and then towards the end of the film, she shoots a hoop and she gets it. Woo, we see the progress. Doesn't work with jokes. Once you've heard a joke once, it is no longer funny when you hear it the second time, even if the delivery is way better the second time.
Right.
So she didn't have as many jokes as we thought, and so following her learning stand up was a little harder to make a film. So we saw that in the edit, and we're like, this isn't working the way we intended it to. It's not as funny as we thought it was going to be. So we had to change and make it a bit more of a personal story and a story about kind of her and her husband, right? So
Hmm.
sometimes you'll realize while you're filming that you have to change,
Right.
um, and sometimes you'll realize in the edit that it's not the way that you thought it would be. But you have to be open to the idea of like, what I thought I was going to film is not what I have.
Exactly.
So how do I make a film with what I have? And it might be different than what you planned.
Oh, be open to rewriting the story in the editing room.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
really, really cool. I hadn't thought of that. Well, the goal of the Ecofilm Lab program is to encourage students to get involved in their communities and to tell their own stories. There might be some students who come out of this realizing that they want to continue pursuing filmmaking. So, if that's the case, what advice would you have for them?
So you have to keep doing it over and over and over. It's like
Got
that 10,000 hour rule sort of thing, right? Like the only way that you're going to get, and some people, will try something, and if it's not very good, if their film is not very good, they go, "Oh, I suck at this, and I'm going to stop." The
Mm,
more important thing is, did you enjoy doing it?
right.
Because if you enjoyed doing it, do it again,
Hmm.
right? Like, don't worry. And like everybody's first films or first 7 films, 10 films, 15 films, aren't that good, right? But the point is that they get a little bit better each time. That you
Right.
see the slight progression, the slight progression. You get better at interviewing people and talking to them about you figure out better questions to ask them. You get better at filming, choosing your angles and this. You get better at taking out the uninteresting parts and making it together.
Right.
So the only way to get good at this is just to keep doing it over and over and over and don't let yourself get discouraged.
Mhm. I love that. It's like any playing any sport or playing any instrument. It's practice. Not that practice makes
Mhm.
perfect, because perfect doesn't exist, but it's just you get better and better and better. You're competing with
Yeah.
yourself, no one else. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Kat. I think that's all that we have time for today. This has been so great, and I know that the students are going to love it. So thank you again for participating.
It's my pleasure. And yeah, I'm always happy to answer questions or I think, just go out and have fun. And
Yeah.
it's cool. The cool thing about documentary and what I love about documentary is that you get a subject and you get to learn as much as you can about that subject, which is really fun. And then you have something to show for your efforts after. Like, I made this thing, you know? And next time I'm going to make a slightly different thing, or the story is going to change. I'm going to find something else, and I'm going to have a new thing to show, and that's really cool. So don't write yourselves off. Don't get discouraged,
Mhm.
and just enjoy the process. And like, it's really fun. It's really fun to make films.
Yeah, you might find your next favorite hobby. I know plenty of filmmakers that all of a sudden started farming or, getting involved in other aspects of their community because they just once you do that deep dive, you find your friends, you find your people over there too. So it's exciting all the doors that it can open. Absolutely.
Totally. And actually, since making the Billboard Squad, I've started looking at the city and being like, what do I want to change about this city? And I've
Exactly right.
started my own projects. So like you can get inspired by like if you find something or somebody interesting, you're gonna come out a different person afterwards because you're gonna learn a lot from the process and you're gonna take inspiration from the people you're meeting. So,
I
you
totally
know.
agree. I think
Mhm.
that's a perfect note to end on. Thank
Great.
you.
My pleasure. Thank you.